At 7 p.m., I walked in. My fiancée was laughing with my dad. Then she called him babe. I had never been late to my parents' house on a Sunday. My mother was the type to keep the roast warm and the potatoes under foil, and I was the type who hated disappointing her. That night, though, traffic on the interstate was brutal, and by the time I pulled into the driveway, the clock on the dashboard glowed 7 p.m. sharp. I remember grabbing the bottle of wine from the passenger seat, straightening my jacket, and rehearsing in my head how I would tell my parents about the promotion at work. It wasn't official yet, but I had the inside track. My fiancée Clara had told me earlier in the week to make it a surprise. Don't ruin it over the phone, she'd said with that bright smile that always made me feel like the luckiest man in the room. That smile was the last thing I expected to see when I opened the door, and yet there it was, except it wasn't aimed at me. The living room lights were low, a warm glow spreading across the hardwood. My father, Walter, was leaning back on the couch, tie loosened, shoes off, his posture far too relaxed for a man who never allowed himself to be seen out of order. Beside him, Clara sat cross-legged, her hand dangerously close to his. They were laughing. Not the stiff politeness you show to future in-laws, but the kind of laughter that comes when two people share something private. I froze at the entryway. For a second, I wondered if maybe they were watching one of those old sitcom reruns my dad pretended to hate. But then Clara tilted her head back, hair spilling down her shoulders, and said the word that shattered everything. Babe. It slipped out casually, coated in the softness of someone too comfortable. My brain tried to twist it, convince me she was joking, or quoting a line from whatever had made them laugh. But I saw the shift in my father's face. A small smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, one that was out of place, almost guilty. He didn't correct her. He didn't even flinch. The wine bottle nearly slid out of my hand. My knuckles whitened around its neck as a dozen scenarios crashed through my skull. Did she mean me? Had she forgotten I wasn't in the room? Or had I just stepped into something I was never supposed to witness? I cleared my throat, more to prove to myself that I still existed in that room than to get their attention. They both jolted, not with the guilt of strangers caught in sin, but with the sudden realization that the secret moment had an audience. Aaron, my father said, recovering too quickly. You're late. Clara's face drained of color. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and gave me a smile that trembled at the edges. We were just waiting for you, she said, her voice pitched higher than usual. The urge to demand answers pulsed at the back of my throat, but years of conditioning kept me in place. My father was a man who controlled every room he entered, and I had spent my life either trying to live up to him or get out from under his shadow. Confronting him wasn't just difficult. It felt like walking into a storm unarmed. Still, I couldn't ignore what I'd heard. Dinner was already set on the table. My mother, Margaret, bustled in from the kitchen, oblivious to the crackle of tension. She carried a tray of bread and shot me a look that said, finally. She kissed my cheek and thanked me for bringing the wine, then placed it down without noticing the way my hand shook as I set it beside her. We all sat, the four of us, the perfect family tableau. Except nothing felt perfect anymore. Clara sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes darting anywhere but mine. My father carved the roast with mechanical precision, his face the portrait of normalcy, while my mother chattered about a neighbor's new dog. I couldn't hear any of it. My ears were filled with the echo of that one word. Babe. I tried to test the waters, to catch them in a slip. So, I said, stabbing at a potato I had no appetite for. What were you two laughing about when I came in? Clara jumped in before my father could speak. Oh, just something on TV. You know how your dad hates those commercials, and... My father cut her off with a sharp glance. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to freeze her in place. Margaret, oblivious, laughed. Your father hates everything on TV. That's nothing new. The rest of the meal blurred into silence and clinking silverware. I forced bites of roast into my mouth, though they turned to ash on my tongue. I could feel the sweat prickling at the back of my neck, every nerve screaming that something had shifted, that I had stepped into a reality I didn't recognize. When dessert came, I excused myself under the pretense of a work call. In truth, I needed to breathe. I stepped out into the cool night air, gripping my phone like it was a lifeline. The porch creaked under my weight as I sat on the step, my mind replaying every moment of the last hour. Clara calling my father babe. His smirk. Her attempt at covering. His silence. I scrolled aimlessly through my phone just to ground myself, but every vibration of a notification made me flinch. I didn't want answers from a screen. I wanted the truth from the two people sitting in that house, pretending nothing had happened. After a few minutes, I went back inside. The living room was empty. The TV hummed quietly, a commercial flashing across the screen. My mother was in the kitchen, humming as she wrapped leftovers. From upstairs came the muffled sound of voices. My stomach twisted. I knew those voices. I climbed the staircase slowly, each creak of wood betraying me. At the top, I stopped outside the guest bedroom. The door was cracked open just enough to let the light spill across the hall. Clara's voice, hushed, urgent. He almost heard me. I slipped. My father's reply, low and controlled. Then you'd better be more careful. He can't know. Not yet. The floor tilted beneath me. The world I thought I knew collapsed in on itself. I didn't push the door open. I didn't burst in. Something in me said, wait. Listen. That was the moment my role shifted. No longer just the betrayed, but the observer. The detective. And that was only the beginning. The ride back to my apartment that night felt like driving through fog. The city lights stretched into streaks, horns blared without meaning, and my phone buzzed a few times in my pocket, but I didn't check. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my head drowning in the echo of that single word Clara had used. Babe. My fiancé calling my father that word wasn't just a slip. It was the kind of mistake people make when their secret becomes their comfort. When I finally stepped inside my apartment, the air felt too still, as though it were waiting for me to acknowledge the truth I had overheard upstairs. They had been whispering like conspirators, not guilty lovers in panic. My father's words were deliberate. Not yet. That meant they had a plan, something drawn out, something calculated. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair staring at the muted television, the shadows of commercials flickering across the walls. By morning, I knew I couldn't play dumb. Confronting them head-on would lead nowhere. Both of them were too good at controlling narratives. If I accused them without proof, I'd become the paranoid son and insecure fiancé. They would twist it back on me. I needed evidence. Clara had left her purse on the couch when she stormed out of my place the night before, claiming she was tired. She'd driven separately to dinner, which struck me as unusual at the time, but I hadn't questioned it. Her purse sat there, slouched against the cushion. My chest tightened as I picked it up, debating whether to cross the line between respect and survival. Inside was her phone. She never let it out of her sight. I knew her passcode, though. She'd given it to me months earlier when she wanted me to change the playlist during a drive. My fingers trembled as I tapped it in. The screen unlocked, opening the gateway I never should have entered but had no choice but to explore. The messages were the first thing I checked. Most threads looked normal, friends from work, her sister, some group chats. Then I noticed one buried lower than expected, saved under the name Gina. Clara didn't have a friend named Gina. I opened it. My stomach dropped. The messages weren't from a woman. They were from my father. The thread stretched back months. It started subtly, compliments about how beautiful she looked at family gatherings, jokes about how Aaron, me, never noticed certain things. Then the tone shifted. Hidden inside casual exchanges were phrases that no father-in-law should ever send. They met at hotels, the names of which were shortened into codes only they would understand. There were pictures, too, not explicit, but intimate enough to send a chill through me. Clara, taking a mirror selfie, lips slightly parted, with a caption meant for him. My father responding with emojis that didn't belong in a father-son dynamic. I closed the thread, while rising in my throat. This wasn't speculation anymore. This was betrayal written out in text. I checked her calendar next. Several work dinners lined up perfectly with the weeks my father had claimed to be away on business trips. One location pin remained in her map's history, an address that matched a hotel 10 miles from my parents' home. The date was from 2 weeks ago, a Tuesday. I'd worked late. She had texted me that night saying she was exhausted and heading to bed early. My hands shook as I placed the phone back in her purse. That morning, Clara showed up to retrieve it. Her smile was carefully crafted, her tone casual, but her eyes flickered with something sharper. She must have known she'd left it. Maybe she worried I had looked. She asked how I slept. I lied and said fine. She kissed my cheek, thanked me for holding onto her purse, and left with a softness that didn't reach her eyes. The walls of my apartment pressed in. I needed to breathe, needed to think. That evening, I drove to the hotel address pinned in her map's history. The building loomed like a monument to secrets, its neon sign buzzing faintly against the twilight. I parked across the street, watching as couples filtered in and out, wondering which of those nights had been theirs. The next step was riskier. I waited until Friday, the day my father always hosted poker night with his friends. Except that week, he had canceled last minute, saying he wasn't feeling well. My mother mentioned it casually on the phone, but her tone carried suspicion, like she didn't entirely believe him either. I parked a block away from their house and watched. At 8 p.m. sharp, Clara's car rolled up. She was dressed too elegantly for a simple evening with her fiancé's parents. She knocked once, glanced around nervously, and slipped inside when my father opened the door. The image burned into me like acid. I took out my phone, zoomed in, and snapped photos. Proof. I stayed parked for nearly an hour, waiting to see if she would leave. She didn't. The lights in the upstairs guest room flickered on, then off. Curtains drawn. Silence. Driving away, I nearly punched the steering wheel in rage, but I held it in. I needed to think, not explode. They were clever, both of them. If they had been carrying on for months under my nose, they knew how to bury tracks. But every criminal leaves crumbs. I just had to collect them. The following week, I started asking subtle questions. Clara mentioned being busy at work, her eyes darting away whenever I pressed for details. My father avoided me more than usual, his calls short, his excuses flimsy. My mother, meanwhile, began complaining about odd charges on the joint credit card. One statement, she showed me had a hotel expense she assumed was a client meeting. I knew better. I began piecing together the puzzle like a detective on a case I never asked for. Receipts from restaurants across town. Calendar entries that didn't align with her office schedule. Even a neighbor of my parents casually mentioning how often he saw Clara's car parked outside when I wasn't around. Each piece sharpened the picture, pulling me deeper into the truth. The breaking point came when I followed her one evening. She said she was going to a yoga class. I trailed her at a distance, my heart pounding like a war drum. Instead of the studio, she drove straight to a bar near the edge of town. She walked inside, checked her phone, and 10 minutes later, Walter entered. They didn't sit across from each other like conspirators. They sat side by side, his hand grazing her knee under the bar counter. I recorded everything from the corner booth, each second a dagger in my chest. It wasn't just an affair. It was coordination, routine, almost ritualistic. They weren't fumbling through some careless fling. They had created a parallel life right under my nose, structured with lies so efficient that even my mother hadn't fully grasped what was happening. The weight of it crushed me on the drive home. Every family dinner, every shared laugh, every whispered plan Clara and I had made about the future, all of it was poisoned. But the fury that followed kept me from collapsing. This wasn't just about love stolen. It was about betrayal by the two people who were supposed to stand beside me in life. That night, I opened a folder on my laptop and began saving everything. Screenshots of texts, photos of hotel receipts, time-stamped videos from the bar, notes about their routines. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was evidence. And evidence meant I wasn't going to be silenced. I didn't know exactly when or how I would use it. But I knew one thing for certain. They thought I was blind. They thought they had time. They thought I would never know. They were wrong. And soon, they would understand just how wrong. The folder on my laptop had grown thick with digital rot. Photos of Clara's car parked in front of my parents' house, screenshots of her messages with Walter, receipts that matched her late nights at work. Each entry was a nail hammered into the coffin of the life I thought I had. Yet, even with the evidence, I held back. I didn't storm into their faces with accusations. I didn't send the screenshots to my mother. I didn't even hint to Clara that I knew. Why? Because what I'd overheard that night upstairs still rang louder than everything else. Not yet. That wasn't just a slip. That was a plan. And if they had a plan, I needed to know what it was before I blew the lid off. The next chance came quicker than expected. My father had always been a creature of habit. Every second Friday, he hosted poker night. A handful of his business buddies, whiskey, cigars, the kind of smoke-filled, half-laughing evenings that felt carved into his identity. Except since Clara entered the picture, poker nights became inconsistent. Cancelled, moved, sometimes mysteriously postponed. I knew if I shadowed the right evening, I'd find them together again. But spying from the street wasn't enough anymore. I needed to be inside. That Friday, I called his friend Lawrence, one of the poker regulars. I lied and said I wanted to surprise Dad with a bottle of his favorite whiskey, but didn't want to interrupt the game. Lawrence chuckled, said poker was off again, and gave me the alibi. Walter claimed he had meetings to prepare for. Meetings? At 9 on a Friday. I parked down the street again, but this time I didn't stay in the car. I slipped around the back, across the hedges I'd run past as a kid, and crouched under the guest bedroom window. Light bled through the curtains. Shadows moved across the fabric. I pressed my phone's camera against the glass at a narrow angle. The video came out grainy, but the audio was clear enough. Clara's voice, tight, annoyed. You told me he'd be out of the picture before the wedding. Walter's, calm, rehearsed. And he will be. But if we push too fast, he'll suspect. He needs to stay comfortable until the papers are signed. Papers. My chest squeezed. What papers? Clara, he's already suspicious. I slipped last week. Walter. Then you smile more. You keep him in bed, and you don't make mistakes again. Once the accounts are transferred, once he inherits the rest, we'll be set. That's when you cut him loose. I nearly dropped the phone. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft, orchestrated with the precision of a business deal. They weren't simply sneaking around. They were planning to strip me clean. I leaned against the siding of the house, breath shallow, rage clawing at my chest. My father, The man who raised me with lectures about loyalty and family was plotting to funnel my inheritance through my fiancée. And Clara, who once cried in my arms about building a home together, was agreeing to gut me financially while pretending to plan our wedding. I stayed crouched until the light clicked off and silence settled. My legs cramped, my hands numb, but my resolve sharpened. Now I knew the stakes. They weren't just playing with my heart. They were playing with my future. The next day, I staged my own test. Clara and I were supposed to look at wedding venues. I canceled last minute, claiming a work emergency. Instead of going downtown as she told me, she drove straight to the same hotel I'd followed her to before. This time, I entered after her. I kept my distance, lingering near the bar with my phone hidden, pretending to scroll. She sat at a corner table. 10 minutes later, Walter walked in, sunglasses still on despite the dim light. They kissed, quick, careful, but real. Not a greeting between in-laws, but the intimacy of people who thought the world wouldn't dare look too close. I recorded again. Then came the detail I hadn't expected. Walter pulled a folder from his briefcase, slid it across the table. Clara flipped through the papers quickly, nodding. I caught snippets of their conversation. Bank accounts, joint assets, power of attorney. The blood in my veins ran cold. This wasn't just a plan to keep me blind until the wedding. They were setting up the scaffolding to take everything in my name the moment the timing was right. When I left the hotel, I knew the evidence I had now wasn't just about infidelity. It was fraud, conspiracy, something bigger than family betrayal. The trap came into focus that evening. Instead of confronting them, I baited them. I told Clara that my promotion was moving faster than expected, that the company wanted me to sign a contract that came with a large signing bonus and inheritance clauses, benefits tied to family financial history. Her eyes lit up. She asked a few too specific questions, like whether my parents would be notified of the documents. I answered vaguely, watching her catalog the information in her head. 2 days later, I found out my father had called my company. He framed it as a proud father checking in, but I knew better. He wanted confirmation. Luckily, a friend in HR gave me the heads up. Walter had asked about my salary increase, whether I'd listed a joint partner for insurance, and if there were upcoming estate planning sessions. The noose was tightening, and not around them. Around me. I doubled down on collecting proof. I placed a discreet recording device in my parents' study when my father invited me over under the guise of discussing the wedding budget. He excused himself for a phone call, leaving me to look over some documents on his desk. I didn't touch them. Instead, the device stayed rolling. Later, listening to the audio, my heart slammed against my ribs. Walter's voice was clear as day. Once the funds transfer, we'll reroute it through her account. He'll be too shocked to fight it. Her account. Clara's. The puzzle was complete. My fiancé and my father were colluding not just to betray me, but to dismantle me. They had the timing, the method, and the arrogance to think I would never see it coming. But now I did. I wasn't going to rush it. Bursting in with accusations would hand them the narrative. Walter would spin it, Clara would cry, my mother would crumble. No, I wanted them exposed not as flawed humans, but as liars, thieves, and manipulators, cornered without escape. So I began building the trap. I printed the photos. I organized the receipts. I timestamped the recordings. I laid everything out like a prosecutor preparing for trial. Each piece told the story, how they met, how they planned, how they slipped, and how they intended to gut me alive. The plan was simple in concept, brutal in execution. I'd wait until the family was all in one room. My mother, my relatives, anyone who still looked at Walter as a figure of respect. And then, I'd flip the folder open and watch the empire crumble. Until then, I smiled. I played the part. I let Clara believe her fake wedding was still in motion. I let Walter think his intimidation kept me blind. I even showed up to dinners, shaking his hand, pretending everything was normal. But inside, the fury had calcified into something colder, something sharper. They thought I was weak. They thought I was naive. They thought the son would never rise against the father. They were wrong. And soon, everyone else would see it too. By the time the following Sunday rolled around, I had rehearsed the plan so many times it played in my head like a script. Every movement, every word, every reveal was mapped out. My folder of evidence had grown thick, each page a blade honed to slice through the carefully built facade my father and Clara thought they had perfected. I chose Sunday for a reason. My mother insisted on family lunches, an old tradition she never let fade. Extended relatives often dropped in, cousins, uncles, even a few of my father's business associates who lived nearby. It was the perfect stage, intimate enough to feel personal, but public enough that Walter couldn't spin his way out without witnesses. That morning, Clara dressed with unusual care. A white blouse tucked neatly into a skirt, subtle jewelry that shimmered just enough to catch the eye. She thought she was dressing for her future as the wife of a man about to inherit both money and status. I watched her from across the room, every detail of her movements sharpening my resolve. "You're quiet," she said, smoothing her hair in the mirror. "Just thinking about today?" I replied, keeping my tone even. She smiled, mistaking my restraint for nerves about the wedding planning we were supposed to discuss. By noon, we arrived at my parents' home. The smell of roast chicken drifted from the kitchen, and voices carried from the dining room. My mother greeted us warmly, though her eyes lingered a little too long on Clara, suspicion flickering behind them. She didn't know the truth yet, but she sensed cracks in the surface. Walter stood at the head of the table, pouring wine into glasses like the patriarch he always styled himself to be. When his eyes met mine, there was no warmth, only the usual command, the silent reminder that this was his house, his rules. Clara slipped into the chair beside him, too close for comfort, and my stomach churned. I waited. We began eating. Conversation flowed around the table, small talk about work, children, vacations. I stayed quiet, letting the tension coil, letting Walter and Clara grow comfortable in their lie. The longer they felt secure, the more brutal the strike would be. Halfway through the meal, I cleared my throat. "There's something I'd like to share," I said, my voice calm, steady. Forks clinked against plates as everyone turned to me. Clara shifted uncomfortably, sensing a change in the air. Walter raised an eyebrow, his smirk already forming like he knew he could dismiss whatever I was about to say. I slid the folder onto the table. It landed with a dull thud, heavier than its size suggested. "This," I said, opening it, "is what my fiancé and my father have been doing behind my back." The first photo I pulled was of Clara's car outside the hotel. Gasps rippled around the table. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her fork clattering onto the plate. Walter's face froze, the smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of calculation. Clara's breath hitched, her hand trembling as she reached for the paper before pulling it back like it burned. Next, I laid out the screenshots. Messages between Gina and my father. Compliments turned into innuendo. Meeting times disguised as business trips. Pictures Clara had sent him, his replies laced with intent no father should ever direct toward his son's fiancée. The table erupted. Cousins whispered in shock. An uncle swore under his breath. My mother muttered, "Oh God," again and again like a prayer. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out the receipts, hotel stays, dinners, expenses routed through accounts. Then the recordings, transcribed neatly into documents. "He can't know?" "Not yet. Once the accounts transfer, we'll reroute through her." The words filled the room like poison. Walter finally broke his silence. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You're twisting things, Aaron. Those are private." "Private?" I shot back. "Private affairs with my fiancé? Private plans to rob me of my inheritance? Private schemes to gut your own son while pretending to mentor him?" Clara shook her head, tears welling up, but no denial came. She knew the evidence was airtight. My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the tile. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a line that trembled with rage. She looked from Walter to Clara, then back to me. "How long?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "How long has this been going on?" Neither answered. Their silence was the loudest confession of all. I leaned back, letting the weight of the evidence sink into every witness around the table. "This isn't just betrayal," I said. "This is fraud. This is theft. And it ends now." Walter's jaw clenched. He tried to stand, to regain control of the room, but my uncle slammed a hand on the table. "Sit down, Walter," he barked, his voice dripping with disgust. "You've shamed this family enough." Clara crumbled then, sobbing into her hands, the image of innocence shattered. My mother turned on her with a venom I had never heard before. "You sat in my house, smiled in my face, planned a wedding with my son while sleeping with his father? You disgust me." The fallout spread like wildfire. Relatives who once admired Walter for his business acumen now looked at him like a criminal. Whispers filled the room. What this meant for his reputation, for his company, for the family name. Clara, once welcomed as a daughter-in-law, was now radioactive. No one moved to comfort her. I gathered the folder, slid the remaining documents back inside, and stood. "I'll be sending this to your business partners, Walter. And Clara, don't worry. You'll have plenty of time to think about what you've done while you pack your things." My mother didn't stop me as I walked out. She didn't ask me to reconsider, didn't try to salvage the family dinner. She simply stared at Walter, her silence more devastating than any words. Outside, the air felt sharp, alive. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. The days that followed were chaos. Walter's business partners received the folder anonymously. Within a week, 2 contracts were canceled, investors pulled back, and whispers about unethical conduct spread through his company. His spotless image cracked, and though he tried to bury the scandal, the damage stuck. My mother filed for divorce. Quietly, decisively. She moved into my aunt's house, leaving Walter alone in the mansion he'd once lorded over. He tried to contact me, left voicemails ranging from anger to desperate bargaining, but I never picked up. Clara tried too. First with apologies, then with pleas. She showed up at my apartment once, eyes red, suitcase in her hand. I didn't open the door. She left crying, and I watched from the window as she disappeared into the night. Word spread quickly through her circles as well. Friends distanced themselves. Her employer, whose reputation relied heavily on clean image and trust, let her go after whispers reached them. She moved out of town within a month, her name now associated with betrayal so public it followed her like a stain. As for me, I rebuilt. Slowly, deliberately. The pain didn't vanish overnight, but it transformed into clarity. I had seen the worst of two people I once trusted most. I had chosen not to collapse under it, but to expose it, to ensure they couldn't continue unchecked. One truth remained. Betrayal had ripped my life apart, but the reckoning had rebuilt it stronger.